I've been behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler for more than 2 decades now, crisscrossing the back roads of Appalachia like veins pumping life through these old mountains. It's a solitary life, one that suits me. Long hauls from Pittsburgh down to Knoxville or Atlanta, listening to the hum of the engine and the crackle of my CB radio breaking the silence with chatter from other drivers. The pay's steady, and the views, well, they can be something else when the fog lifts and you catch the sun dipping behind those endless ridges. But these hills have a way of holding on to their secrets, the kind that make you question if you're really alone out there. I've heard the stories around truck stops, tales of strange lights in the woods, or figures darting across the road at night, but I always chalk them up to fatigue or too much black coffee. That is, until that one run through Harlan County, Kentucky, back in the fall of 18. Nothing's been the same since. It was a Friday night. I remember the kind where the air hangs heavy with the promise of rain that never quite falls. I'd picked up a load of machinery parts in Charleston, bound for a warehouse in Lexington, and I was pushing to make time before the weekend traffic clogged the interstates. My rig was an old Kenworth, reliable as they come, but she'd been acting up lately. Little hiccups in the fuel line that the mechanic swore he'd fixed. The GPS on my dash was one of those cheap models, glitchy in the mountains where signals bounce off the peaks like echoes in a holler. As I wound through the narrow county roads, flanked by dense forests that seemed to press in closer with every mile, the device started acting funny. It rerouted me off the main highway onto a gravel service road I didn't recognize, one that twisted up into the foothills near an old mining town long since forgotten. The fog was rolling in thick by then, swirling around the base of the trees like smoke from a dying fire. My headlights cut narrow beams through it, illuminating patches of overgrown brush and rusted signs warning of private property. I cursed under my breath, glancing at the clock, already past midnight, and I needed to deliver by dawn. The GPS insisted this was a shortcut, though, leading straight through to the other side of the ridge. Up ahead, the road dead-ended at a chain-link fence, half-collapsed and tangled with vines. Beyond it loomed the mouth of an old coal tunnel, boarded up with weathered plywood and faded no trespassing notices. I'd heard about these relics, abandoned shafts from the boom days when coal was king, now just hollow scars in the earth. Locals avoided them, saying cave-ins and bad air made them death traps. But desperation's a funny thing. I figured if I could nudge the boards aside, my rig might just squeeze through. What's the worst that could happen? A ticket? I killed the engine for a moment, listening to the quiet settle in, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the wind. No other sounds, no signs of life. I hopped out, flashlight in hand, and pried at the boards of the crowbar from my toolbox. They gave way easier than expected, splintering with a crack that echoed into the darkness beyond. Squeezing back into the cab, I fired up the engine and eased the truck forward, the tires crunching over debris as the tunnel swallowed us whole. The entrance was wider than it looked, carved out from mining equipment back in the day, but the walls closed in quick, rough-hewn stone dripping with moisture that gleamed in my high beams. The air turned cool and damp, carrying that musty scent of earth and decay, like opening a long-sealed cellar. Dust motes danced in the lights, and the graffiti on the walls jumped out. Names, dates, crude drawings from kids who'd probably snuck in on dares. Rusted rails from old mine carts snaked along the floor, overgrown with weeds that had somehow found their way in. I kept my speed low, the rig rumbling through puddles that splashed against the undercarriage. The GPS signal dropped entirely, the screen flickering to a blank map. No big deal, I told myself. Tunnels play havoc with electronics. Just keep straight, and I'd pop out the other side in a few miles. About a half-mile in, the path started to slope downward gently, the ceiling lowering enough that I had to duck my head to glance up. The echoes of my engine bounced back, distorted, like the mountain was mocking the noise. I fiddled with the radio, scanning for a station to cut the monotony, but all I got was static, white noise that rose and fell like breathing. I shook it off, focusing on the road ahead, more like a path now, uneven and pitted from years of neglect. The fog from outside had seeped in somehow, or maybe it was mist from the walls, but it made the beams hazy, turning the tunnel into a blurred corridor. I check my mirrors out of habit. Nothing but blackness behind, the entrance long gone around a bend. Isolation hit me then, that familiar trucker's companion, but sharper here, underground where the weight of the world pressed down. It was around the mile mark, my odometer ticking over, that the engine first sputtered. A cough, then a stutter, the rig lurching like it had hit a pothole. I eased off the gas, coasting a bit, and popped the hood release. Fuel line. Had to be. That damn mechanic hadn't fixed it right. Cursing again, I grabbed my flashlight and toolkit, stepping out into the chill. The air nipped at my skin through my flannel shirt, and the silence rushed in, broken only by the drip-drip of water from somewhere above. I shone the light under the hood, probing the lines, but everything looked fine. No leaks, no clogs. Weird. As I tinkered, a faint sound caught my ear, like a whisper on the edge of hearing. At first, I thought it was the wind whistling through cracks, but there was no breeze down here. It came again, softer, almost like a child's voice murmuring nonsense words. I froze, straining to listen. Names? It sounded like names, drifting from deeper in the tunnel, echoing off the walls in a way that made it hard to pinpoint. I slammed the hood shut, heart picking up a notch. "Hello," I called out, my voice booming back at me, distorted and lonely. No answer, just that drip and the settling dust. Probably my imagination, I reasoned. Echoes from water or bats or something. I climbed back in, turned the key, and the engine roared to life without issue. Relief washed over me as I pressed on, but the whisper lingered in my mind, nagging like a half-remembered dream. The tunnel stretched on, darker now, the graffiti giving way to bare rock scarred from pickaxes. I spotted old equipment abandoned along the sides. Rusted carts, broken tools, even a helmet dangling from a hook, covered in grime. It felt like stepping back in time, into the belly of a beast that had devoured men whole during the mining days. I recalled stories my grandpa told, a miner himself before the unions shut things down. Cave-ins that buried crews alive, their screams echoing for days until silence claimed them. Shaking my head, I turned up the heater to ward off the growing cold. The whispers returned a few minutes later, clearer this time. Not just names, but fragments of sentences. Route 52, Pittsburgh load, midnight run, my route. My skin prickled. How could that be? I glanced at the dash clock, still ticking toward 1 a.m., and the words matched details from my manifest, things I hadn't shared over the radio. "Who's there?" I shouted, slowing the truck. The engine hummed steady, but the voices didn't stop, multiplying now, overlapping in a low murmur that filled the cab like smoke. Not loud, never loud, but insistent, pulling at my attention. I killed the engine again, stepping out with the flashlight gripped tight, sweeping the beam into the shadows ahead. Nothing but rock and darkness, yet the whispers drew me forward, a few steps at first, then more, my boots crunching on gravel. That's when I saw them, faint outlines in the gloom, just beyond the light's reach. Silhouettes, hazy like heat shimmer, shaped like men in overalls and hard hats, hunched as if still swinging picks. No faces, no details, just forms that shifted slightly, as if breathing. My beam caught one, and it didn't scatter like a shadow should. Instead, it held, the murmur growing to include pleas, help, trapped, air's gone. Panic surge, my chest tightening. These weren't tricks of a light. I knew the history. A cave-in back in '63, right around here, 20 miners lost when a shaft collapsed. Their bodies never recovered, the tunnel sealed off. But here they were, or something of them, whispering secrets they shouldn't know. I backed away, heart hammering, but the path behind seemed twisted, the truck farther than I remembered. The silhouettes didn't advance, didn't chase, just watched, their forms multiplying in the periphery, the murmurs weaving my name into their chorus. Join us, stay. No screams, no gore, just that quiet dread, the earth's patient hunger. I turned and ran, flashlight bobbing, the whispers chasing like wind at my back. The tunnel elongated, bends appearing where none had been, the air thickening until each breath burned. Scratches bloomed on my arms from brushing walls, but I didn't stop. lungs aching, mind reeling with images of being buried alive, forgotten like those miners. Hours blurred, or was it minutes? Time lost meaning down there. Finally, a pinprick of light ahead, the entrance, moonlit fog spilling in. I burst out, collapsing on the gravel, gasping, the whispers fading to a distant hum. My rig was still inside, abandoned in my terror. I flagged down a passing logger at dawn, who called for a tow. They found the truck intact, engine fine, but the cargo hold empty, parts gone, vanished without a trace. No explanation, just shrugged from the crew who refused to go deep. The sheriff wrote it off as theft, but I know better. Even now, years later, hauling different routes, I avoid those mountains after dark. The whispers return in dreams, murmuring routes I've never taken, names of loads yet to come. Sometimes on quiet nights, I hear them in the wind through my window, calling me back to that forgotten shaft. The earth remembers, you see, and it's patient. One day, I fear it might pull me under for good, leaving only echoes in the dark. Let's move to the next story. I've been a long-haul trucker for nigh on 15 years, mostly running routes through the heart of Appalachia where the roads twist like snakes through the hollers and ridges. It's a job that wears on you. The endless miles of blacktop, the isolation that seeps into your bones like the damp from these mountains. But there's a rhythm to it, a comfort in the solitude, watching the world slide by through the windshield while the CB crackles with voices from other drivers sharing warnings about wrecks or weather. I grew up in these parts, in a small town near the Virginia-Kentucky line, so I know the legends, stories of lost miners, feral folk hiding in the woods, and places where the land itself seems to remember the blood it's soaked up over the centuries. I never put much stock in them, figuring they were just ways to pass the time around campfires or at diners. That changed one stormy evening back in the summer of 17, when I decided to cut through the old tunnel under Black Mountain. What happened in there still wakes me in the dead of night, sweating and listening for echoes that aren't there. The run started ordinary enough. I'd loaded up in Pittsburgh with a shipment of auto parts headed for a distributor in Knoxville, Tennessee. The manifest said delivery by morning, but a pileup on I-79 had me running 2 hours behind schedule. Rain was coming down in sheets by the time I hit the state line, the kind of downpour that turns the roads slick and the visibility to near zero. My wipers slapped back and forth like a metronome, and the thunder rolled through the valleys like distant artillery. I knew the main highway would be a crawl with semis backed up, so I started thinking about shortcuts. Locals talk about the Black Mountain Pass in hushed tones, an old service tunnel bored through the rock back in the 40s for coal haulers, abandoned after a series of accidents in the 70s. Maps don't show it anymore, but if you know where to look off a gravel turnoff near Pineville, there's a way in. I'd heard truckers swear by it for shaving off time, but others warned against it, saying the place had a bad feel, like the mountain didn't want you there. Hunger for making my deadline won out over caution, and I veered off the pavement onto the muddy track, my rig bouncing over ruts as lightning cracked the sky. The entrance appeared out of the gloom like a forgotten grave, overgrown with kudzu vines that draped like funeral shrouds over the cracked concrete arch. Weeds choked the ground, and chunks of fallen rock littered the approach, but the opening was wide enough, maybe 20 feet across, tall enough for my trailer to clear with inches to spare. I eased the truck forward, the headlights piercing the darkness inside, revealing walls pocked with age and water stains running like tears down the stone. The rain muffled to a distant patter as I entered, the tunnel enveloping me in a hush that felt unnatural, like stepping into a vacuum. The air shifted immediately, turning thick and heavy, laced with the musty odor of wet earth and something sharper, metallic, like rusted iron or old blood. I chalked it up to the minerals in the rock, the way these old mines sometimes smell after decades of seepage. My tires hummed on the uneven floor, splashing through shallow puddles that reflected the beams back at me in fractured glints. I kept my speed low, around 15 mph, the engine's growl echoing off the walls in a way that made it sound like another truck was trailing me. The CB radio, which had been spotty in the storm, now hissed with pure static, a white noise that grated on my nerves. I twisted the dial, hoping to pick up a station or maybe a chatter from other drivers, but nothing came through clear. The tunnel stretched on longer than I'd anticipated. Folks said it was about 3 miles end to end, but in the dim light, it felt interminable. Graffiti faded into view on the walls. Old tag from the 60s and 70s. Names and dates scrawled by workers or kids who'd wandered in. Rusted chains dangled from the ceiling in places, remnants of old barriers, and here and there, I spotted discarded tools. A pickaxe handle, a crumpled hard hat, left behind like artifacts from a bygone era. The isolation pressed in, that familiar trucker's companion, but down here was amplified, the weight of the mountain above making every breath feel labored. About a quarter mile in, the static on the radio began to modulate, dipping and rising like voices trying to break through. At first, it was just fragments, garbled words that could have been interference from the storm above. I leaned forward, adjusting the volume, and caught snippets. Breaker 19, got a Smoky on my tail. Old school trucker lingo, the kind my dad used back in the day. I smiled a bit, figuring it was some atmospheric bounce, signals from far-off rigs skipping off the clouds. But as I drove deeper, the voices clarified, overlapping in a chorus that didn't make sense. Handles I'd never heard. Coal runner to Big Blue, you copy? Routes washed out near the pass. Routes from the 70s, ones rerouted after floods and landslides. I frowned, glancing at the radio display. No signal bars, yet the voices persisted, faint but insistent, like echoes from a tape recorder left running in an empty room. Help! Pinned under, can't breathe. One voice cut through, pleading, and my skin prickled. Interference, had to be. These tunnels could act like amplifiers for weird radio waves. The storm must have intensified outside because the air grew cooler, condensation forming on the inside of my windshield. I wiped it with my sleeve, keeping one eye on the path ahead, which narrowed slightly, the walls brushing close enough that my mirrors scraped occasionally with a screech that set my teeth on edge. Halfway through, or what I guessed was halfway, since my GPS had crapped out entirely, the headlights flickered, dipping low for a split second before surging back. In that brief darkness, something caught my eye. A figure standing dead center in the road ahead, motionless, silhouetted against the faint glow from my dims. It was a man, or what looked like one, dressed in outdated overalls, the kind with reflective strips from decades ago, a hard hat tilted on his head. My heart slammed into my ribs as I jammed the brakes, the rig shuddering to a halt with a hiss of air brakes, the trailer jackknifing slightly on the wet floor. I stared, breath caught, but when the lights steadied, the figure was gone, nothing but empty tunnel stretching into black. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, the rain's distant rumble filtering down through vents in the rock. What the hell? I muttered, rubbing my eyes. Fatigue? Maybe. I've been on the road since dawn. I eased off the brake, creeping forward, flashlight in hand, shining out the window. No tracks, no sign anyone had been there. The voices on the radio swelled again. Louder now, not just chatter, but urgent pleas. Collapse. The roof's coming down, trucks buried. No way out. They described it in detail. A convoy of haulers trapped in 72 when a storm-triggered cave-in sealed the tunnel. Men and machines entombed alive. I'd heard the tale in passing at a truck stop once, dismissed it as exaggeration. But hearing it now, in their own words, overlapping echoes like a looped recording, sweat beaded on my forehead despite the chill. The metallic scent intensified, almost coppery, and I tasted it on my tongue. Pushing on, I tried to shake it off, cranking the heater to ward off the damp that seemed to seep through the cab. But the tunnel felt different now, the walls subtly shifting in the periphery, closing in like a slow constriction. What should have been a straight bore twisted with unexpected bends, the floor rising and falling in waves that jolted the rig. The echoes grew, not just from the radio, but from the air itself, bouncing off the stone in a cacophony of desperation. Names called out, prayers muttered, the groan of buckling metal. No screams, just that quiet, building dread, the sense of lives snuffed out and lingering, unwilling to fade. My hands gripped the wheel white-knuckled, the path ahead blurring as panic nibbled at the edges of my mind. How long had I been in here? The dash clock read 11:45 p.m., but that couldn't be right. I'd entered around 10:30. Time slipped, minutes stretching like taffy. Another flicker of the lights, and there it was again. The figure, closer this time, standing off to the side, arm outstretched as if hailing a ride. I swerved instinctively, the trailer scraping the wall with a shower of sparks. Gone again in the blink, but now others joined. Shadowy outlines in the corners of my vision, clustered like they were conferring, their forms hazy but human, trapped in postures of toil or terror. The voices pleaded directly now, addressing me. "Brother, turn back. It's holding us. Don't join." My breath came in short gasps, the air thinning, oxygen sapped by the depth. I floored the accelerator, the engine roaring in protest, but the exit eluded me. The tunnel endless, a labyrinth carved by malice. Walls pressed closer, brushing the cab, and I felt the mountain's weight, its ancient grudge against those who'd hollowed it out. Finally, after what felt like hours, a glimmer ahead. The exit, rain-sheened and welcoming. I burst out into the storm, tires spinning on mud as I skidded onto the gravel road. The voices cut off abruptly, leaving only the patter of rain and my ragged breathing. I pulled over, killing the engine, and checked my logs. Entry time logged at 10:32 p.m., exit at 2:17 a.m., nearly 4 hours unaccounted for in a 3-mile tunnel. No damage to the rig, but my hand shook as I lit a cigarette, the flame dancing in the wind. I made my delivery that morning, late but intact, and never spoke of it to the warehouse folks. But back at the truck stops, I listen now when old-timers whisper about Black Mountain. They say the pass holds onto the lost, echoes of those who didn't make it out, waiting to pull others in. I reroute my runs these days, sticking to the highways even in storms. Yet sometimes on quiet nights, I hear them again, faint conversations bleeding through the static, calling routes I know too well. The dread lingers in every shadow, a reminder that these mountains remember, and they don't forgive easily. One wrong turn, and you might just become part of the echo. Story 3. I've been logging miles as a trucker for close to 25 years now, most of them winding through the backcountry of Appalachia where the roads hug the contours of the land like old scars. It's a life of routines, loading up at dawn, dodging deer at dusk, and pulling into rest stops where the coffee's always bitter and the stories even more so. I grew up in these parts, in a hollow near Beckley, West Virginia, where folks still talk about the mines that built and broke families. My pa worked the seams until black lung took him slow, whispering warnings about the dark places under the earth where men went in whole and came out changed, if they came out at all. I never heeded those tales much. The road was my escape, the cab my sanctuary. But there's one stretch that still creeps into my sleep, turning rest into restlessness. The ridge tunnel outside of Hinton, a narrow gash in the hillside that's claimed more than its share of secrets. What happened that autumn night in 14 haunts me not with screams or blood, but with a silence that watches and waits. The haul was straightforward. Fresh produce from a farm co-op in Ohio down to markets in Charlotte. Apples, pumpkins, crates of squash stacked high in the refrigerated trailer. The kind of load that demands you keep moving to beat spoilage. It was mid-October, the leaves turning those fiery shades of red and gold that make the mountains look alive. The night was clear, stars sharp overhead. No hint of the chill that would settle in later. I'd planned to stick to Route 64, but orange barrels and flashing lights blocked the way. Construction, they said, a bridge inspection gone long. Detour signs pointed me onto a county road, one of those forgotten byways flanked by overgrown fields and sagging fences. My GPS recalculated, leading me toward the old Ridge Underpass, a relic from the 30s when they blasted through the hill for rail lines, later widened for trucks before the interstates came. Locals called it the Winding Ridge, and I'd heard murmurs about it at diners. Accidents in the fog, drivers vanishing for hours, but I figured it for exaggeration, the way stories grow in the telling. As I approached, The entrance loomed out of the dark like the open maw of some buried beast, framed by jagged rock and vines that clung like fingers. The concrete was cracked, weeds pushing through, and the lights inside, old sodium bulbs spaced every 50 yards or so, flickered dim and yellow, casting long shadows that danced with the motion of my rig. I eased in, the truck's rumble amplifying off the walls into a low growl that vibrated through the steering wheel. The air changed quick, turning cool and clammy, carrying that earthy tang of moss and stone, the kind that reminds you how deep you're going. No radio signal down here, just static hissing like distant rain. So I hummed an old tune to fill the void, my headlights carving a tunnel of light through the gloom. The path wound gently, following the ridge's curve, the ceiling low enough that I imagined scraping it if I hit a bump wrong. It started subtle, that low vibration, not from the engine, which purred steady, but from the walls themselves, a faint hum like distant drilling echoing through the rock. I felt in my chest first, a resonance that made my ribs buzz. Probably just the tires on uneven pavement, I told myself, or maybe water dripping in hidden fissures. These old tunnels had veins of groundwater, seeping through cracks like blood from a wound. I kept driving, eyes on the faded white line painted decades ago, but the hum persisted, growing into a rhythm that didn't match my speed. The lights ahead dimmed further, bulbs burned out in patches, leaving stretches of near black where my beams struggled to penetrate. That's when the shapes began to form in the corners of my vision. Elongated shadows stretching across the walls, not cast by my headlights or the sparse lamps, but moving independently, like fingers reaching out from the stone. I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes with the back of my hand. Long hours on the road played tricks, shadows from fatigue, dancing like mirages. But these didn't fade. They elongated unnaturally, twisting in ways that defied the light sources. One slithered along the ceiling, another pooled on the floor ahead, forcing me to swerve slightly. My pulse quickened, but I pushed it down, rational mind kicking in. Maybe exhaust fumes building up, or the vibration messing with my equilibrium. I slowed the rig to a crawl, then stopped altogether, killing the engine to listen. The silence rushed in, thick and oppressive, broken only by the drip of water somewhere deep. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box, a heavy mag light that doubled as a club, and stepped out, boots echoing on the concrete. The chill hit me immediate, seeping through my jacket like icy fingers, the air heavy with that underground dampness that clings to your skin. Shining the beam around, I inspected the truck, tires fine, no leaks, nothing amiss. The walls gleamed wet in the light, etched with faint scratches that could have been tool marks from the original dig or something more recent. As I walked a few paces, checking for debris that might explain the vibration, I heard it, soft footsteps pacing alongside the cab, deliberate and measured like someone matching my stride but staying just out of sight. I whipped the flashlight over, heart thudding now. But there was nothing, just the empty tunnel stretching back into shadow. The steps continued, faint scuffs on the grit-covered floor, circling the rig. "Who's there?" I called, my voice bouncing back distorted, mocking. No answer, only the chill deepening, raising goose flesh on my arms. I climbed back in quick, locking the door out of habit, though what good that would do down here I couldn't say. The engine turned over on the first try, and I eased forward, telling myself it was echoes, my own boots rebounding off the walls in some acoustic trick. Deeper in, the tunnel tightened, the path winding sharper, the vibration intensifying into a pulse that thrummed through the seat. The shadows coalesced now. No longer just shapes, but vague, human forms emerging from the gloom. Hunched figures along the edges, their outlines hazy like smoke, mimicking movements frozen in time. One swinging an invisible pick, another clawing at the air as if buried under rubble. I knew the history, piece from old news clippings and bar talk, a cave-in back in the 50s during expansion work when a crew of 12 got trapped under tons of rock. Rescuers heard tapping for days, then nothing. Bodies never recovered. The section sealed, but later reopened. These forms didn't approach, didn't make a sound. They just watched, oppressively silent, their presence a weight that pressed on my chest. Sweat trickled down my back despite the cold, my breaths coming shorter as the air grew stale, laced with a faint, acrid scent like burnt powder from old blasts. Then the engine stalled, sputtered once, twice, and died, the headlights dimming to a glow before winking out. Darkness enveloped me, absolute and suffocating, the only light my flashlight on the dash. Panic clawed at my throat. I cranked the key, but nothing, no click, no turnover. Cursing under my breath, I grabbed the light and toolkit, stepping out again into the void. The footsteps returned immediately, closer now, brushing past like a draft. I swung the beam wildly, catching glimpses of those forms, more distinct, faces blurred but eyes seeming to glint, fixed on me. They followed as I walked toward the engine, a procession in the shadows, their cold brushing against my skin like ghostly touches, raising hairs and sending shivers deep. No aggression, just that unrelenting observation, as if judging my every move, weighing whether I belonged among them. My hand shook as I popped the hood, probing wires and connections by flashlight, the vibration now a constant tremor underfoot, like the ridge itself was alive and stirring. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the silence broken only by my ragged breathing and those persistent steps. One shadow loomed closer, its form mimicking a man pinned, arm outstretched in silent plea. I felt it then, a profound sorrow seeping in, mixed with the dread, the sense of lives cut short and lingering, unwilling to release their hold on this place. Finally, a spark. The engine caught on a desperate turn of the key, roaring back to life with a cough of exhaust. I slammed the hood, dove into the cab, and floored it, the rig lurching forward as the shadows receded in the mirrors, but not before one last cold caress along my neck. The tunnel twisted on, endless in my terror, until at last the exit appeared, a circle of starlit sky, welcoming as salvation. I burst out, gasping, pulling over on the shoulder, hands trembling on the wheel as I gulped fresh air. The produce made it to Charlotte, a bit bruised but intact, and the mechanics later found nothing wrong with the truck. Just a glitch, they said. But I know better. That quiet observation from the ridge's dead, the way they watched without word, it sticks with you, burrows into your thoughts like roots in soil. I avoid tunnels now, rerouting even if it adds hours, but the dreams come anyway, shadows pacing my bedside, judging in silence. These mountains hold their judgments close, you see, and once they've seen you, they never truly let go. Every dark stretch of road feels like a potential grave, waiting for the right moment to claim its due. Story 4. I've been driving trucks through the winding roads of eastern Kentucky for as long as I can remember, ever since I dropped out of high school and hitched my future to the hum of a diesel engine. It's a life that suits a man like me, solitary, predictable in its unpredictability, with the mountains standing sentinel on either side like old guardians who've seen too much. The hollows here are deep, carved out by rivers and time, and the folks who live in them carry stories passed down like heirlooms. Tales of lost hikers, strange lights in the woods, and places where the ground itself seems to whisper regrets. I never paid them much mind. The road was my reality, the CB radio my companion, crackling with warnings about black ice or fallen trees. But there's one route I took back in the spring of 19 that changed all that, a forgotten tunnel cutting through the hills near Painesville. What happened, and there wasn't some ghost story for the diner crowd. It was real, quiet, and it burrows into you like damp earth under your nails. The day had started routine enough. I'd picked up a load of lumber in Ashland, bound for a construction site in Lexington, the kind of haul that pays steady but demands you beat the rush hour snarl on the interstate. Traffic reports over the radio mentioned a multi-car pileup on I-64, backups stretching for miles, so I started eyeing alternatives on my worn-out map book. The GPS was useless in these parts, signals bouncing off the ridges like echoes. Locals had mentioned an old mining tunnel, a shortcut from the coal boom days, half buried in memory and kudzu. It wasn't marked on modern charts, but if you knew the turnoff, a gravel pull-out past an abandoned gas station, you could shave off an hour. Dusk was settling in as I approached, the sun dipping behind the peaks, casting long shadows that stretched across the road like fingers reaching out. The air carried that pre-night chill, laced with the scent of pine and distant rain. I eased the rig off the pavement, tires crunching over loose stones, and there it was. The entrance, hidden behind a curtain of vines that swayed gently in the breeze, as if breathing. I idled for a moment, headlights piercing the overgrowth, revealing cracked concrete and rusted rebar jutting out like bones. The opening was wide enough for my semi, though the mirrors would brush the sides. No signs warned against entry, just faded graffiti on the arch. Names, dates, a crude skull that some kid probably sprayed years ago. I chuckled to myself. Superstition was for the greenhorns, and shifted into gear, the truck rumbling forward as the vines parted like a veil. Inside, the world narrowed quick. The air grew heavy, cooler than outside, with a faint odor of sulfur wafting from vents in the rock, old mining gases, I figured, seeping from sealed shafts. My high beams cut through the dim, illuminating walls scarred from dynamite blasts. Water trickling down in thin streams that pooled on the uneven floor. The tunnel wasn't straight. It wound with the hill's contour, the ceiling low enough that I ducked instinctively at every dip. The CB radio, which had been buzzing with chatter from other drivers griping about the jam, faded to static as I delved deeper, a white noise that filled the cab like fog. I twisted the knob, scanning channels, but nothing came through clear. Isolation set in then. That familiar trucker's cloak, but down here it felt thicker, the mountain's weight pressing from above. I kept my speed low, around 10 mph, the engine's growl echoing back, distorted, like another vehicle lurking just out of sight. Puddles splashed under the tires, and the sulfur scent strengthened, mixing with the musty tang of decay. Old equipment littered the sides, rusted carts tipped over, coils of wire tangled in weeds that had improbably taken root in the dark. It reminded me of stories my uncle told, a miner who'd lost friends to floods in these very hills, water rushing in silent and swift, claiming lives without a sound. I shook the thought, focusing on the path ahead, the beams revealing more graffiti, deeper in "Please like God help us" scratched into the stone, dates from the 40s. About a quarter-mile down, the static on the CB shifted, a single drawn-out breath, like someone exhaling slowly over the airwaves. I froze, hand on the mic, listening. It came again, deliberate, closer somehow, as if the speaker was leaning in. I chuckled it off as a prank, some bored driver with a clear signal messing around. But when I keyed the mic and called out, "Cut the crap, who's this?" only silence answered, followed by another breath, raspy and prolonged. My skin prickled. Tunnels played tricks with sound. Maybe it was wind through cracks or my own breathing amplified. I turned the radio off, preferring the quiet, but the cab felt emptier without it. The engine's hum, the only company. The tunnel narrowed ahead, walls closing in, my mirrors scraping stone with a screech that echoed sharp. I glanced in the rear view, adjusting for the curve, and that's when I saw it. A pale handprint blooming on the passenger window, fresh and smudged, as if placed from outside just moments ago. No condensation, no dirt, just 5 fingers and a palm, stark against the glass. My heart stuttered. No way anyone could be out there. The tunnel was sealed, no side paths, and I'd have seen movement in the lights. I stopped the rig, brakes hissing, and stared at the print, breath fogging the inside now. It wasn't mine. I'd been alone since Ashland. Leaning over, I wiped at it with my sleeve, but it smeared outward like it was on the exterior. A chill ran down my spine, the sulfur odor sharpening to something acrid, like burnt matches. I hopped out, flashlight in hand, circling the cab. Nothing, no footprints in the dust, just the handprint glaring back, slightly distorted now. The air hung still, no draft, yet the breaths returned. Not from the radio, but from the tunnel itself, echoing softly, drawing nearer with each exhale. Panic nibbled at the edges. I climbed back in, locking the doors out of instinct, and gunned the engine forward, mirrors grinding again as the path tightened. Midway through, or what I guessed was midway, since the odometer seemed sluggish, the breaths evolved into murmurs, indistinct at first, like wind through leaves but forming words, fragments about loads never delivered, rivers rising, trapped in the dark. My route? No, older. Drivers vanished in cave floods decades back, semis swallowed by sudden waters from breached shafts. I'd heard the legends of truck stops. A collapse in '58, a convoy caught in a flash flood, men and machines buried under mud and rock, their calls for help echoing unanswered. The murmurs wove in details, handles from that era, cargoes of coal, and timber lost forever. Sweat beaded on my forehead, the cab growing stuffy despite the chill. I accelerated, but the tunnel twisted unexpectedly, bends appearing where the path had been straight, disorienting me like a maze shifting. My headlights flickered, brief strobes revealing etchings on the walls. Names scratched deep. Dates, please like tell my wife, air gone. Frantic march from hands that knew the end was near. The quiet urgency built, those murmurs pulling at my resolve. An invitation whispered from the depths, urging me to stop, to listen, to stay. The handprint on the window seemed to pulse in my periphery, and I felt a presence, unseen but palpable, like eyes boring into me from the shadows. No figures, no apparitions, just that oppressive silence broken by breaths and words, the mountain's memory exhaling its dead. My hands gripped the wheel slick with sweat, the rig lurching over uneven ground, trailer thumping behind. Time blurred. What should have been minutes stretched, the exit eluding me as if the tunnel elongated to keep me. Flickers of light, not mine, danced ahead, illuminating more scratches, a calendar of despair etched by the lost. The murmurs grew personal, whispering my name, my load details, as if scouting whether I'd fit among them. Dread coiled in my gut, not from fear of death but from the sorrow of it. The quiet resignation of lives snuffed out, lingering in the stone, calling others to share the burden. Finally, a sliver of night sky appeared, stars winking through the vines at the far end. I burst out, tires spinning on gravel, the rig fishtailing onto the road as night enveloped me fully. The murmurs faded to a hush, the breaths dissipating like mist, but the handprint remained, smeared but insistent. I pulled over miles later, under a street lamp's glow, and checked the trailer. Locks undone, chains loose, as if tampered with by unseen hands. Nothing missing, but the seals broken, the lumber exposed. No explanation. The sheriff called it vandalism, but I saw no tracks, no signs of entry. That silent call from the buried depths. It's why I reroute now, adding hours to avoid those hollows, sticking to lit highways, even in jams. Yet the invitation lingers, a hushed secret in the back of my mind. On quiet runs, I hear breaths in the wind through vents, see handprints in fog glass that vanish when I blink. The earth remembers it's taken, you see, and in these mountains, it whispers invitations to those who listen too close. One day, I fear might draw me back, not with force but with that quiet pull, leaving my rig empty on some forgotten road. Another echo in the dark. Story 5. I've been a trucker for over a decade, running routes through the Smokies where the mountains rise like ancient sentinels, their slopes thick with fog and secrets that the locals only hint at over coffee at roadside diners. It's a job that demands you listen to your instincts, the way a tire hums on wet pavement, the shift in the wind before a storm rolls in. I grew up not far from here, in a small town outside Gatlinburg, where my granddad spun yarns about the old days. Bootleggers dodging ravine-ewers through hidden passes, folks vanishing in the woods without a trace, their screams swallowed by the trees. I always took them with a grain of salt, figuring exhaustion and moonshine fueled most tales. But instincts failed me that night in the fall of '22, hauling a load of textiles from Asheville to Chattanooga. A rock slide had blocked the main highway. Boulders the size of cars tumbled down like the mountain was shrugging off its skin. Detour signs pointed to secondary roads, but my map showed an old rail tunnel repurposed for emergency traffic, a shortcut beneath the peaks that few used anymore. Warnings flickered in my mind, but time was money, and I was already behind. I turned off the paved path, gravel crunching under the tires as the forest closed in. The entrance appeared abruptly, a black void punched into the hillside, unlit and overgrown with ferns that brushed the hood as I eased in. No barriers, just faded signs from the Park Service warning of potential flooding. My high beams sliced through the darkness, revealing a cavern thick with moisture, the air heavy like breathing in soup. Droplets condensed on the windshield almost immediately, and I flipped on the wipers, their rhythmic slap the only sound besides the engine's low rumble. The tunnel was old, dating back to the early 1900s when rails carried timber and coal through these parts. Later widened for vehicles after the tracks were pulled up. Walls of rough stone glistened with seepage, and the floor was pitted, forcing me to weave around potholes filled with murky water. The scent hit me next, damp earth mixed with something stale, like forgotten cellars where jars of preserves turn to mold. I kept the windows cracked for fresh air, but down here it felt recycled, each breath pulling in the mountain's age-old exhale. My CB radio hissed static, no signals penetrating the rock, leaving me truly alone in a way the open road never does. I drove slow, maybe 15 mph, the rig's vibrations echoing back distorted, making it sound like another truck was shadowing me just out of sight. The path stretched straight at first, but soon it began to curve gently with the mountain's spine, the ceiling lowering in spots where roots had pushed through cracks like bony fingers. I glanced at the dash clock, 11:45 p.m., and figured I'd be out in 10 minutes tops. That's when the strange lights appeared ahead, dim and bobbing like lanterns held by unsteady hands. At first, I thought it was another vehicle, maybe a maintenance crew or a lost driver, so I slowed further, laying on the horn in short bursts. The sound boomed through the space, rebounding until it faded into nothing. The lights didn't react. They flickered, vanished into the gloom, only to reappear in my side mirrors, dancing behind the trailer. My pulse quickened. Reflections? But no, the beam from my rig didn't cast that way. I stopped, engine idling, and shone my spotlight out the window, sweeping the beam. Empty tunnel, just puddles rippling from the vibrations. The lights were gone again, but the air had cooled unnaturally, a chill that seeped through the cab despite the heater blasting. Condensation bloomed on the glass, thick and fast, forming patterns that looked almost deliberate, swirls and lines like crude maps, arrows pointing deeper into the underpass. I wiped them away with my glove, but they reformed quicker, the cold biting in my fingers. Shaking my head, I pressed on, attributing it to the moisture levels, some geothermal quirk from the mountain's heart. The lights returned, ahead now, guiding like the-Wisps from those old folklore tales Granddad loved. Not bright, just faint glows, yellowish and unsteady, bobbing at eye level as if carried by invisible figures. No vehicles, no sources I could see, maybe bioluminescent fungi or gas pockets igniting. Rational thoughts, but my gut twisted, that instinct I'd trusted for years whispering to turn back. The tunnel felt longer now, the curve sharper, side shafts branching off into blackness, old rail spurs sealed with debris but yawning like invitations. Voices emerged then, faintly at first, not words but hums, resonant and low, like chants echoing from hidden chambers deep in the rock. I strained to listen, turning off the heater fan for silence, but they persisted, harmonious yet discordant, rising and falling like a dirge. Recalling stories I'd overheard at truck stops, bootleggers during Prohibition using these tunnels to run shine. Some never emerging after flash floods turned the passages into watery graves. I felt a prickle along my neck. Men drowned in the dark, their last breaths bubbling up through the stone, or so the legends went. The hums grew clearer, not chants but warnings, overlapping echoes of pleas. Water rising. Can't swim. Hold on. My skin crawled. Fatigue, hallucinations. Had to be the mind playing tricks in isolation. But the lights led me astray, drawing my eyes to a side shaft where the main path forked unexpectedly. I corrected, but the rig lurched, engine coughing like it had sucked in water. It sputtered, RPMs dropping, and I coasted to a stop, the underpass swallowing the noise until only drips and those hums remained. Panic edged in. Fuel issue? I grabbed my toolkit and flashlight, stepping out into the chill that wrapped around me like wet cloth. The air was thicker here, the sulfur tang of old floods mixing with the damp, and the hums surrounded me now, vibrating through the ground into my boots. I popped the hood, beams shaking in my hand as I checked lines and filters. Nothing amiss, but the engine wouldn't turn. The lights bobbed closer, encircling the truck from the shadows, their glow illuminating faint etchings on the walls. Initials, dates from the 20s, arrows scratched in desperation pointing to dead ends. In the silence, the hums clarified into fragments. Names called out, coughs from water-filled lungs, the quiet persistence unnerving more than any scream. No aggression, just an insistent pull, the lights guiding toward those side shafts where water stains marked high levels from past inundations. I felt watched, not by eyes but by the tunnel itself, the mountain's memory of the lost lingering in the moisture, drawing me to join. Sweat mixed with condensation on my skin, the cold sapping strength as I walked a stretch, flashlight probing the dark. Footsteps echoed mine, soft splashes and puddles I hadn't made, but turning revealed nothing, just the lights retreating, reappearing to beckon deeper. Hours blurred in that void, or minutes. Time dilated, the dash clock frozen when I returned to the cab. Desperation fueled me. I manually shifted, using the starter to inch backward, the rig groaning in protest as I reversed toward what I hoped was the entrance. The hums followed, swelling to a chorus of sorrow, tales of families waiting above for men who never surfaced. The lights danced in the mirrors, reluctant to let go, their faint allure a subtle trap, promising secrets in the depths. Finally, a breeze, fresh air, and I burst out into the night, stars overhead mocking my terror. The engine caught immediately outside, as if released from some hold, and I sped away, trailer thumping over roots. The load arrived late, but intact, mechanics finding no faults, chalking it to vapor lock or imagination. But those lights are imprinted, the hums echoing in dreams where I wander endless underpasses, drawn by their glow. I avoid the Smokies now, rerouting through valleys even in clear weather, but the dark changes. You see patterns in fog, hear whispers in rain. The mountain trap is patient, you understand, waiting for the next slide, the next diversion, to pull you under with quiet persistence. One wrong turn, and the faint allure claims you, leaving only echoes for those above. Story 6. I've been hauling loads across the Blue Ridge for nigh on 18 years, the kind of runs that take you through valleys where the fog clings like a shroud and the mountains loom silent, watching every turn of your wheels. It's a lonesome trade, one that hardens you to the dark stretches between towns, the way the radio fades to static and your thoughts turn inward. I was raised in these parts, in a hollow near Roanoke, Virginia, where my kin worked the land until the soil gave out, trading stories around the fire about folks gone missing in the woods, hunters, loggers, even kids chasing fireflies too far from home. They blamed it on the wild, on getting turned around in the mist, but there was always that undercurrent, a whisper that the ridges held grudges, claiming souls one breath at a time. I never bought into it fully. The road was my truth, the rig my shield. But that midnight detour back in the winter of 20 shook something loose in me, a quiet hunt through the hidden veins of the mountain that still tightens my chest when the fog rolls in. The night started unremarkable, a standard overnight from Richmond to Knoxville with a trailer full of machine parts, the weight pulling steady behind me. Fog had blanketed the valleys early, thick and white like spilled milk, reducing visibility to a few yards beyond my high beams. The interstate was my usual path, but flashing signs warned of a washout ahead. Heavy rains from the week before had undercut the shoulder, forcing a closure. Detour arrows pointed to a side road, One of those narrow county lanes flanked by skeletal trees and drop-offs that plunged into blackness. My GPS flickered, struggling with the signal, but it confirmed the route. An old service tunnel cutting under the ridge, a relic from the mining days when they honeycombed the hills for iron and coal. I'd heard of it in passing at truck stops, called the vein by old-timers, a twisting bore avoided after dark. But options were slim, and I was pushing against the deadline, so I turned onto the gravel approach, the rig bouncing over ruts as the entrance materialized from a mist, a yawning maw where concrete gave way to raw rock, vines draping the edges like ragged curtains. Easing in, the world outside vanished, the fog sealing the entrance behind like a door closing. The air shifted immediate, cooler and denser, carrying that mineral tang of deep earth, the kind that coats your throat. My headlights pierced the void, illuminating walls rough-hewn and glistening with moisture, stalactites hanging like teeth from the ceiling. The path wound tighter than expected, the rig barely fitting, mirrors brushing stone with occasional sparks that lit the dark like fireflies. I kept the speed low, the engine's rumble echoing back in layers, distorting into a growl that didn't quite match. No lights inside, just my beams carving a narrow cone ahead, revealing discarded relics. Rusted chains, broken timbers, even an old lantern crumpled against the wall, its glass shattered as if dropped in haste. The fog seeped in somehow, or maybe it was mist from the walls, but it hazed the air, making every shadow dance. Isolation wrapped around me, familiar yet sharper here, the mountain's belly pressing close, reminding you how small you are under all that rock. About a half-mile in, the breathing started, labored, rhythmic, syncing with my own but offset like an echo out of phase. At first, I pegged it for the engine, the way air intakes can wheeze on inclines, but when I idled to listen, it persisted, faint but steady, coming from the walls or the air itself. I cracked the window, cold rushing in, and strained my ears. Inhale, exhale, ragged like someone winded from a long run. No wind down here, no vents humming. Just that breath, drawing closer in the quiet. I chuckled it off nervous-like, telling myself it was acoustics, sound bouncing funny in the twists. These tunnels were veined with fissures, old shafts branching off, maybe air currents from above, creating the illusion. I shifted gears and pressed on, but the path narrowed further, the rig scraping now and then, forcing me to focus. Glimpses in the side mirrors caught my eye. Fleeting movement, shadows darting between the stalactites, quick as squirrels but larger, humanoid. I blinked, checking again. Nothing, just rock formations playing tricks in the peripheral light. The air grew stale as I delved deeper, oxygen thinning, or so it seemed, each breath requiring more effort, heightening the unease. The breathing intensified, no longer just one but multiples, overlapping in a chorus of gasps, closing the gap imperceptibly. No chase outright, no pounding feet, but a steady pursuit, like predators pacing prey without rush, knowing the terrain favors them. Stories surfaced in my mind, unbidden, tales of speleologists, cave explorers vanishing in these hidden veins back in the 80s, their maps leading into unmapped branches where air pockets failed and darkness claimed them. Locals whispered they'd heard breaths echoing up from sinkholes, last gasps trapped in the stone, replaying for those foolish enough to listen. I shook my head, gripping the wheel tighter, but the figures returned in the mirrors, fleeting, clad in tattered clothes from another era, overalls frayed and dust-covered, faces obscured but postures hunched, as if still navigating the tight squeezes. Not aggressive, just persistent, matching my pace, drawing nearer with each curve. I stopped again, engine off, flashlight in hand, stepping out into the chill that bit through my jacket. The silence was profound at first, broken only by drips from above, but then the breaths resumed, surrounding me, sinking yet offset, like a pack breathing in unison. I swept the beam behind the rig. Empty tunnel, but the shadows shifted subtly, figures dissolving as light hit them, reforming just beyond reach. My heart raced, not from fear of attack, but from the quiet inevitability, the sense of being hunted without malice, just the mountain reclaiming its own. Back in the cab, I fired up the engine, but it coughed, struggling as if the air was too thin. The path wound tighter, walls blurring as I accelerated, the rig protesting with groans. The breaths turned to gasps, urgent now, closing in, brushing my ears like whispers from the vents. In the rear view, the figures multiplied, darting closer, their tattered forms mimicking miners long lost to collapses, breaths labored from black damp or cave-ins. Panic built slow, a creep rather than a surge, the oxygen deprivation fogging my thoughts, making every decision heavy. Side shafts appeared, yawning black, and the figures seemed to hurl me toward them, breaths guiding like invisible hands. I fought the wheel, staying the main vein, but the tunnel elongated, twists multiplying, disorienting until I doubted my direction. The air grew heavier, my lungs burning with each inhale, the pursuit lingering in every gasp. Bursting out finally into the fog-shrouded valley, I gulped fresh air, the rig sputtering onto pavement as the breaths faded to memory. But they lingered in my lungs, a tightness that hasn't left, a reminder of how the mountains claim their own, one breath at a time. I rerouted my hauls after that, avoiding the Blue Ridge after dark, but the hunt follows in dreams, breaths sinking in the quiet hours, figures pacing just out of sight. The veins run deep, you see, and once they've tasted your air, they never fully release. Every fog valley feels like an invitation, a subtle pull back into the dark, where the pursuit waits patient, breathless. Story 7. I've never been one for omens or superstitions, not after spending most of my adult life behind the wheel of the big rig, hauling whatever pays the bills through the twists and turns of the Cumberland Plateau in Tennessee. The roads here are unforgiving, narrow lanes carved into the rock, flanked by drop-offs that could swallow a man whole, and weather that turns on a dime. I grew up in a small town near Crossville, where folks still gather at the general store to swap stories about the old mines and the men they claimed, but I always figured those were just ways to pass the time, to make sense of the hardships. My job kept me grounded. Load up, deliver, repeat. The solitude suited me. The hum of the engine drowning out regrets from a marriage that fizzled years back. But that night in the spring of 21, when a bridge outage pushed me into that subterranean path locals whisper about after dark, something shifted. It wasn't a scream or a specter that got to me. It was the quiet, the murmured warnings that burrowed deep and haven't left since. The run was hazardous from the start. Chemicals eastbound from Nashville to a plant in Knoxville, tanks of industrial solvents strapped tight in the trailer, the kind that require placards warning of fire and fumes. I checked the seals twice, knowing one spill could turn a bad night worse. The sky was clear at dusk, stars pricking through as I wound up onto the plateau, but radio chatter buzzed with trouble. A semi had jackknifed it on the bridge over Fall Creek, crumpling guardrails and shutting the span for hours. Detour signs flickered in my headlights, directing traffic onto a gravel feeder road that snaked into the hills. My GPS glitched, as it often does in these parts where signals get lost in the ridges. But I recalled the old tunnel from maps I'd studied years ago. A service path dug in the '70s for mining ops, wide enough for trucks, but rarely used since the interstates came. Locals avoided it after sunset, claiming echoes of accidents lingered, but I dismissed it as folklore. With the clock ticking and my load volatile, I turned in, the rig rumbling over uneven ground as the entrance yawned wide ahead, a black void framed by overhanging ledges. Inside, the world constricted quick. The entrance was deceptive, broad at first, like an inviting mouth, but the walls pinched in after 100 yards, damp and glistening with seepage that ran in rivulets down the stone. My high beams cut through the murk, illuminating cracks where roots had forced their way through, twisting like veins in the rock. The air turned heavy, laced with a faint chemical tang that reminded me of my cargo, though I knew it was just the plateau's groundwater leaching old pollutants from abandoned shafts. Puddles splashed under the tires, and the engine's echo bounced back distorted, sounding almost like voices murmuring in the distance. I kept my speed steady, around 12 mph, the trailer swaying slightly on the uneven floor. No lights lined the way, just my beams and the occasional reflective strip peeling from the walls, remnants from when this was a working route. Isolation settled in, thicker than on the open road. The sense that the mountain had swallowed me, its weight pressing down through layers of earth and time. The murmurs started softly, about a quarter mile in, so faint I thought it was the radio, static bleeding through. I tuned to a country station earlier, but the signal had died, leaving white noise. Now, it modulated into words, warnings and accented voices, thick with the drawl of old Appalachia. Fragments like spill come in fire in the hold, mentioning accidents from the 80s that sealed off sections after a tanker blaze. I twisted the dial, scanning for clarity, but the murmurs persisted, not from the speakers but from the air itself, echoing off the walls in a low hum. At first, I laughed it off, acoustics playing tricks, maybe wind through hidden vents carrying sound from above. These tunnels were riddled with them, old air shafts from the mining days. But as I drove on, the words sharpened, detailing things they shouldn't. My cargo manifests, the solvents flash points, even my name whispered like an afterthought. Watch the load. Harlan. Chemicals burn hot. My skin prickled. No one knew my route details, not even dispatch after I'd gone silent in the dead zone. Shadows began to play tricks then, forming in the periphery, dark shapes that looked like barriers across the path, jagged piles of debris or fallen rock. I'd slow, heart picking up, only for them to dissolve on approach, melting back into the walls like illusions. The tunnel twisted more than I remembered, guiding me astray with subtle forks with a main vein branched into narrower spurs, sealed but yawning dark. I corrected course, relying on the faint tire tracks from rare passers-by, but the murmurs urged otherwise. Turn back. Fire waits. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the chill, the cab growing stuffy as if the air was thickening. I cracked a window, but the draft brought only more damp, and the chemical scent intensified, acrid now, like smoke from a distant burn. Midway, or what felt like it, since my odometer seemed sluggish, the truck lurched over uneven ground, a dip that jarred the tanks with a metallic clang. The rig stalled in the halt. Engine coughing once before, silence enveloped me, broken only by the drips and those persistent murmurs. In that quiet, they clarified, pleas from workers entombed in a toxic blaze decades back, their voices woven into the rock like threads in a tapestry. No apparitions materialized, no ghostly hands reaching out, just the pervasive quiet, the weight of unspoken regret hanging in the air. They spoke of the '84 incident I'd vaguely recalled from news clippings, a hauler like me, chemicals igniting in a collision, flames roaring through the tunnel, sealing sections with molten wreckage. Men trapped in side chambers, choking on fumes, their last words scratching at the stone. Can't breathe, tell my boy. One murmured, the accent cracking with sorrow. The shadows coalesced again, not barriers but outlines of forms huddled against walls, dissolving as my flashlight beam swept over. My hands shook as I checked the engine. Wires fine, fuel flowing, but the starter clicked uselessly at first, as if the tunnel held its breath, reluctant to release. Sweat soaked my shirt, the regret in those voices seeping into me, a profound sadness for lives cut short, lingering here in the subterranean gloom, cautioning the living. I abandoned the cab briefly, toolkit in hand, the murmurs swirling around like eddies in a stream, guiding me with warnings that felt personal now. Your load's unstable. Turn round. The air grew heavier, oxygen sapped by depth or delusion. Each breath labored. No violence, no terror in the traditional sense, just that quiet urgency, the plateau's grounded echoes pleading for acknowledgement. I tinkered under the hood by flashlight, the beam trembling, shadows shifting just beyond, forming ephemeral walls that hurted me deeper if I strayed. Time warped, minutes stretched, the dash clock ticking erratic. Finally, the engine caught, roaring to life as if granted mercy. I reversed carefully, the path straightening behind me, as if relenting, bends smoothing out in a way that defied memory. The murmurs faded to whispers, regrets trailing like smoke, but the chemical tang clung to my clothes, a reminder. Emerging into the night, stars mocking the darkness I'd escaped, I pulled over on the gravel shoulder, gasping fresh air that tasted sweet. My log showed discrepancies. Entry at 10:15 p.m., exit at 1:42 a.m., hours unaccounted for in what should have been a 20-minute cut-through. The bridge was still closed, but I waited it out, rerouting at dawn. Mechanics found nothing wrong with the rig, seals intact, no leaks. But those murmured cautions echo in every rumble now, a subtle dread that burrows deep, surfacing on quiet runs through the plateau. I avoid tunnels, adding miles to my routes, but the whispers return in dreams, detailing loads yet to come, names of the lost intertwining with mine. The Cumberland holds its regrets close, you see, weaving them into the rock, waiting for the next outage, the next detour, to share the weight. One day, I fear, the path won't straighten, and the quiet will claim me too, leaving only echoes for those above. The solitude of trucking has always suited me, a man who's more comfortable with the rumble of an engine than the chatter of crowds. For over 30 years, I've navigated the winding veins of Appalachia, from the hollows of Kentucky to the ridges of North Carolina, hauling everything from lumber to livestock under skies that shift from blue to black without warning. The Nantahala region, with its dense forests and rushing rivers, was familiar territory, beautiful in the daylight, but at night it takes on a different face, one etched with the kind of quiet that makes you listen too hard to the wind. I grew up hearing the old-timers at diners spin yarns about the mountain secrets, feral folks living off the grid, lost hikers whose cries echo forever in the canyons, cabins where the wood remembers the screams of those who built them. I dismissed most of it as embellishment, the product of long hauls and longer winters. But that pre-dawn morning in the fall of 19, when flooding turned the highways into rivers and forced me into that abyss-like tunnel beneath the Nantahala, the solitude cracked. What I encountered wasn't a monster or a ghost. It was a chill that seeped deeper than skin, a quiet dread that hollows you out and leaves questions where certainties used to be. The run had been straightforward at first, picking up a load of furniture from a mill in Asheville, destined for a distributor in Atlanta. I'd left before midnight, aiming to beat the morning rush, but heavy rains from the night before had swollen the creeks, turning low-lying roads into lakes. Radio reports crackled with warnings, bridges out, detours mandatory, and my usual path along US 74 was blocked by sawhorses and flashing lights, water lapping at the barriers like hungry tongues. The detour signs pointed to a Forest Service road, one of those gravel tracks that snake up into the hills, rarely plowed and even less traveled. My rig handled it fine, tires gripping the mud as the headlights pierced the pre-dawn gray, a misty half-light where the world blurred at the edges. The GPS sputtered, losing signal amid the peaks, but I knew the area well enough to press on. Up ahead, camouflaged by overgrowth, ferns and vines that draped like forgotten laundry, the tunnel entrance appeared, a dark gash in the hillside, an old mining cut repurposed for emergency access after the 50s booms faded. Locals called it the Abyss, half in jest, but I'd never taken it before. It wasn't on standard maps, and rumors swirled about cave-ins and bad air. With the floodwaters rising behind me, though, choices were slim. I eased the truck forward, the vines brushing the cab with a soft hiss, as if the mountain was sighing at my intrusion. Inside, the change was immediate and profound. The entrance swallowed the gray light, plunging me into a void where my hive beams struggled, casting elongated shadows that danced along the rough walls. The air settled heavy, cooler than outside, but not just from the depth. It was an intrinsic chill like the mountain's core exhaling a breath held for decades. Moisture beaded on the windshield, and I flipped the defroster, the fan whirring to life as the scent of wet stone and faint mildew filled the cab. The path was uneven, the floor pitted from years of seepage, forcing me to slow to a crawl, the rig lurching gently over ruts. Echoes amplified every sound. The tires crunching gravel, the engine's low thrum bouncing back distorted, as if another truck trailed just out of sight. Graffiti scarred the walls in patches, faded tags from the 70s onward. But deeper in, they gave way to bare rock, scarred by pick marks from the original dig. I spotted remnants of the past. Rusted rails half buried in sediment. A crumpled hard hat wedged in a crevice, its strap frayed like it had been clawed at. The solitude amplified here, the outside world muted to nothing, leaving only the tunnel's quiet pulse, a rhythm that synced with my breathing but felt off, like listening to your own heartbeat through water. It started subtle, that faint scratching, nails on stone, rhythmic and deliberate, echoing from ahead or the sides, hard to pinpoint. At first, I thought it was debris under the tires scraping the undercarriage, but persisted even when I idled, a persistent tap-tap scratch that paused, then resumed like Morse code from the dark. My skin prickled. Tunnels like this had vermin, bats, or rats scrabbling in the cracks, or maybe loose rocks shifting under pressure. I kept driving, but the chill deepened. Not a draft, but something pervasive, seeping into my bones despite the heater blasting warm air. The cab's thermometer read steady, yet my fingers numbed on the wheel, breath fogging the glass in thick clouds. I stopped midway, or what I guessed was midway, since the tunnel stretched longer than anticipated, to listen, killing the engine and grabbing my flashlight from the glove box. The silence rushed in, thick and expectant, broken only by distant drips and that scratching. Closer now, deliberate as if etching a message. Stepping out, boots echoing on the damp floor, I swept the beam along the walls, the light cutting through dust motes to reveal marks. Faint scratches clustered in groups, not random but patterned, dots and dashes, distress signals gouged into the stone. My heart quickened as I traced them with my finger, the rock cold and unyielding. I recalled the stories dimly. A cave-in back in the 60s, during expansion work for the rail lines, a team of 8 buried under a collapse triggered by floodwaters weakening the supports. Rescuers had heard tapping for hours, then nothing. Bodies never recovered. The section abandoned, but later reopened for access. These marks matched the tales. SOS patterns, names, initials, dates fading but legible in the beam's glare. The chill intensified, wrapping around me like a wet blanket, sapping the warmth from my core. No wind, no drop in temperature, yet it felt like hypothermia setting in, the kind that claims lost hikers in these mountains, lulling them to sleep in the snow. I shivered, rubbing my arms, but the cold persisted, accompanied by a presence, unseen but palpable, lingering just beyond the light's reach. Not a figure, not eyes in the dark, but a weight in the air, like being observed by the tunnel itself. The rock remembering the men it had entombed, their last breaths frozen in the stone. Back in the cab, I turned the key, but the engine turned over sluggish as if reluctant. The heater sputtered, fans slowing to a wheeze before failing altogether, the warmth draining away like blood from a wound. Condensation bloomed on every surface, patterns forming in the frost. Lines that mimicked the scratches, arrows pointing deeper or back, I couldn't tell. Panic nibbled at the edges, not sharp but insidious, the chill sapping my will, evoking those old legends of the lost. Men wandering these depths during storms, their bodies found curled as if asleep, faces peaceful but eyes wide with unspoken terror. The scratching resumed, guiding now, taps leading me to restart the rig. It caught finally, coughing to life, and I inched forward, but the path seemed altered, bends appearing where straightaways had been, the tunnel elongating like a living thing. The presence followed, a subtle pressure in my back, cold fingers brushing my neck through the vents. No violence, no sudden assault, just that enveloping dread. The mountain's quiet claim on those who venture too deep, sapping resolve until surrender feels inevitable. Time blurred in the abyss. What should have been minutes dragged into hours, the odometer ticking slow as if mired in mud. The scratches echoed louder, rhythmic pleas that synced with my pulse, drawing me on or warning me away. I couldn't discern. Side shafts branched off, black maws where the chill emanated strongest, and I felt the pull, a subtle invitation to veer off, to join whatever lingered in the dark. Sweat froze on my skin, breath shallow and labored, the air thinning as if the tunnel hoarded oxygen for itself. Memories surfaced unbidden. My uncle, a miner who'd survived a partial collapse, whispering about the cold call, how the earth exhaled its dead, pulling the living down with quiet regret. I fought the wheel, staying the faint path marked by old tire grooves. But the presence pressed closer, the chill burrowing into thoughts, planting doubts. Was the exit real, or just another illusion? Finally, a glimmer ahead. The surface, pre-dawn light filtering through vines like a distant promise. I burst out, the rig skidding on wet leaves, gasping as warmth trickled back slow, like blood returning to numb limbs. The load made it to Atlanta, delayed but intact, and mechanics blamed the heater on a faulty fuse, the stalls on moisture in the lines. But the chill lingers in memories, a hollow where certainty once was. I avoid the Nantahala now, rerouting even in dry weather, but it follows cold spots in the cab on warm nights, scratches in the static of the radio, a presence just beyond sight. The Appalachian abyss reshapes you. You see, with its quiet, enveloping dread, leaving questions that echo in the dark. Was it the mountain's memory, or something of me left behind? One flood, one detour, and the chill might call again, sapping until there's nothing left but hollow regret.